Another way to get around using cages is to composite multiple bakes or hand editing the normal map yourself. Once in a while you run into a situation where changing the ray distance values will fix some parts of your normal map, but it may introduce problems in other areas. In cases like this, you can composite the best parts of separate bakes together into a single map. It's not the ideal solution, but sometimes it can be the fastest and easiest way to fix a problem. I think this is frowned upon from a technical standpoint, but if you're careful with it, I think it produces perfectly acceptable results. In this situation here, I have the same scene as before, except this time I'm adding this sphere to the high-res model, and I want to bake it down onto the same low polygon model. And if I jump over to Photoshop, you can see what I have here, and this is one of the bake results, is that there's a little flaw right in the middle of the sphere. Never mind this part. This is the underside of the shield, the shoulder pad or whatever this is, and it's not that important. So we're just going to focus on this area right here. So let's say that using the ray distance value that I had, this was the result. And what I could do is I could change the ray distance values, and maybe it would, like this, I turn on this layer and it fixed this problem, but it may have introduced another problem over here. And I mean, this is a totally artificial situation. I created this flaw myself, but just as an example, what you could do is you could, I'm just adding a layer mask to this layer, and just make sure that with a fuzzy brush that you paint out if you paint out black in the mask, then it'll get rid of the detail right there. And it's as simple as that, really, combining two maps together to one. Now this is a very simple situation. Sometimes it can get more complicated than this, but the key is to make sure that you fuzz the edges around. You can see that this is kind of what the map really is cutting out this area, and I just want the edges to be fuzzy in case there were some other differences in the way this baked, and which can happen sometimes. If you change the ray distance values too greatly, it could introduce some different coloring into the surfaces in between. So a fuzzy edge will help kind of disguise that a little bit. Again, this is not something I recommend as your initial reaction to solving a problem, but if you're short on time and you're having a lot of problems, then this can be a pretty effective way to fix the problem. If you plan on hand editing a normal map in Photoshop, such as painting out artifacts and seams, then it's best to limit what you're doing to just hiding small errors in the bake. And this is because it can be very tricky to paint on a normal map, and you could easily make things much worse if you don't know what you're doing. If you actually want to create detail, then I do not recommend trying to paint it by hand. It's much too time consuming and difficult. There are a lot better ways to do it if you want to actually create detail. You could use something like painting normals in 3D Code, or converting what you're painting. Like, let's say you painted a design and you want to convert that to an effective normal map. There's some filters you could use, or you could use something like Undo, which is really good for that kind of thing as well. But yeah, just try to keep your actual painting of normals to just trying to fix little problems, such as this right here. The same situation as before, and there's this little hole that I want to get rid of. Now this is a pretty simple example, but at the same time it's not that easy because this is a round shape, and trying to preserve that roundness with painting can be a little bit difficult. Before you do any painting, it's good to get a grasp for how the colors are working in the normal map. Depending on how you baked your normal map, the different colors would create different changes in the surface appearance. Examine the directions that the colors appear to be coming from, and color pick from areas that are similar to what you're trying to achieve. For example, you can see there's kind of like a red light coming from the right, greenish light from above, bluish from the left, and like a purple from the bottom. So with that in mind, depending on what your shape is, you want what the colors you pick to be of that same family. And in this example, I already have a fixed layer here that I did. This is what I hand painted. And if I just let me just get rid of that and try to do it again. So the idea for me is to just use a soft fuzzy brush, and I almost always use a soft fuzzy brush just to make sure that things transition smoothly to the surrounding areas, because any kind of abrupt change in the color could show up as a seam or a bump in the render. So you kind of want to pick a color that is similar to the surface that you want to replicate, and just kind of paint it out, paint it gradually. And it is always definitely best to do this kind of thing on another layer. And in this situation, it was also kind of ideal because it was not on the center line. It is close, but the problem with having things on the center line is you also have to worry about trying to get things to mirror as well, and which is the whole problem with having normal map seams down the center of your model. It can be a very tricky thing to get rid of, and sometimes not even possible if your game engine is using completely different tangents, a different way of interpreting the tangents than what you baked. But yeah, it's just something like this. And if you're unable to find colors that work, you say you do this and whatever you do, it just looks bad, then kind of an easy way to get around this is to just fill it with the normal map flat color. Back here, again, that's 240 in hue, 50% in saturation, and 100% in brightness. And here you can see all I did was I just kind of painted it like that. It's with a soft edge. So you can see here in Maya the result of just coloring that area with a flat color, and you can see it definitely flattens out the normal map, and it doesn't look great. And I wouldn't recommend this method for something that would be very obvious to players, but if there's something that's not quite visible but you still don't want it to be a distraction, sometimes just a flat color would be preferable than a glaring error in the bake that you couldn't get rid of quickly in another way. If you did do any editing to your normal map, then you're going to want to normalize the map as the final step. Back in Photoshop here, let's say this was the result I liked. I'll flatten it. Then what you want to do is run under Xnormal. If you have Xnormal installed, there's an option to normalize the normal map. If you take a look at the normal map closely before and after. Well, I guess in this case it didn't change much, but you may see your normal map shift a tiny bit. And that's just because all of the tangents need to equal 1 again. And since you're painting by hand, things will inevitably get thrown out of balance. And what the normalization does is it just kind of helps prevent any weird rendering artifacts from appearing on the model. Again, this whole thing, compositing normal maps and hand editing normal maps, it's really something that you should do as a last resort. Depending on the problem, it can actually be pretty time consuming to do as well. If your model is completely covered with errors and you were trying to paint out all of them. So in that case, you'd be better off rebaking or editing the geometry and trying to find an actual bake that worked properly. But if it's just a small isolated part, and normal maps can take a while to render depending on the situation. Sometimes just covering it up in a quick way like this is okay.